And to unpack this situation further, we're joined on the broadcast by Colin Strong-Keats. He's a foreign affairs and security strategist, University of Malaya, and he joins us live from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Thank you so much, Collins, for joining us on the broadcast. Now, Collins, we understand that the war has entered its third week now, and with neither side willing to back down and no clear off-ramp in sight. According to your reading of the trajectory so far, how long do you think this war is going to realistically drag on from here on?
Well, we have seen how both sides have been adamant in trying to maintain postures, and missile and drone attacks across the Gulf also shows that Iran is trying to maintain this horizontal escalation, and there's also a new ball game as to how under the Trump administration how the U.S. is trying to also plan the exit strategy, knowing how President Trump will also react to this this notion that he's not a fan of a prolonged or protracted conflict, raising the cost for the U.S. military. Of course, we've seen how also it is now a psychological war, a narrative war, a messaging war as to how the U.S. is also having this relatively, virtually limitless supply of munitions. And of course, also we've seen also how Iran is said to be running low in terms of drones, in terms of the capacity to enact these, drone strikes and missile strikes on targeted, strategic infrastructure, including on oil facilities. So if this is the case, then we will see the kind of responses under President Trump, especially in targeting, and bringing this forward to a new theater in terms of also this notion of coercive economic warfare to threaten the fundamentals of Iran's economic lifeline. And of course, targeting the Kar Island also marks a major escalation from military targets to now to this new theater of economic pressure. And of course, bringing this further pressure on Iran to ensure that the Strait of Hormuz remains open, and that of course the U.S. stands to gain in terms of oil prices. It still remains as the biggest energy exporter. Now that under President Trump, he has regained energy dominance, but still in terms of the overall geopolitical power play, the U.S. will still want to maintain that an open and free Strait of Hormuz will be of great importance not only to the U.S. but also as part of its obligations to the wider world. But I don't foresee this to prolong further, and this will be contained within this initial framework of a month or two. This is how President Trump is trying to frame this whole strategic warfare.
Right, and we understand that this is still an evolving situation, and Israel has announced that the war against Iran will go on until all the objectives are met. But what is also interesting is what we're seeing from the Trump administration now, and for the first time we're also seeing diverging views where Trump has said that the objectives of the war could differ from Israel. Now, this is a significant development, and at the same time we know that U.S. has initially hinted that they would want the war to be 2 to 4 weeks long, and now we've already entered the third week. But having said that, who do you think holds the realistic leverage here to bring this conflict to an end?
Well, the ball is still in the court of Washington. We have seen how initial objectives to decimate the capacity of Iran in terms of reducing its the capability to have this kind of prolonged drone and missile capacities. And now that we have seen reports have been emerging that the stockpiles, the volumes of drones and missiles have been significantly reduced, and that if that remains as part of the initial original objectives of the Trump administration, I don't foresee any kind of a prolonged or is there any continuous or pretext or this factor to remain for the U.S. to maintain any kind of a protracted conflict, unless of course there have also been discussions on getting U.S. troops on the ground to secure or to prevent any kind of this capacity by Iran to use the nuclear card, and of course also in terms of targeting the targeted nuclear bunkers and strategic nuclear places, and that would need an additional at least a month or two, and that might be prolonged further if there's any resistance being faced. But initially, if it's contained by air power alone, and of course by targeting deeper bases and sites of Iran, I don't foresee that to go beyond the initial 1 or 2 months original timeline. That is provided this objective of the Trump administration will still be in ensuring that this decimation of Iranian missile and drone capacity, including on nuclear capacity, is still in place. But nuclear capacity is a different ballgame. that will
Right.
that is not being it's not being able to be contained just by the power of airstrikes or air power alone, and that will need this significant strategic boots on the ground or strategic presence on the ground by the US, and that will risk to be to prolong this initial timeline of 4 to 8 weeks.
Of course, and we understand that regime change was not as straightforward, an operation as perhaps the Trump administration would have anticipated. And just with aerial strikes and not boots on the ground, it would have been a different equation. But at the same time, I'm also curious to know your reading of the latest comments that we're hearing from Reza Pahlavi, who said that he's already ready to form this transitional administration, and he's recruiting people from inside and outside of Iran when the Islamic Republic falls. How do you read that?
Well, he has not been getting the needed support, both domestically as well as also from the higher echelons of the Trump administration. Trump himself has not been that keen to get him to assume the leadership, and we have seen the different notions, the different narratives in place, at least domestically, and he has not been in the country for decades now. I doubt that he has the needed support, and of course, he will face this continuous resistance, and of course also we have seen the original objective has not, at least officially, has not been a regime change. He has always been focused on the need to ensure that the conventional capacity of Iran, especially in terms of drones and missiles, and of course also the nuclear capacity are constrained. And now that we are entering this phase of this is a decisive phase now. And as to what extent, as to the volume of in degrading Iran's military capacity and disrupting its financial resources, weakening its regional proxy networks, so as to how far all these objectives have been met, and for this to continue for the next couple of years, and to ensure that there's a long-term stability, of course, Collins, we need, of course, the
right,
stable
Collins,
leadership.
We understand this is an evolving situation, and we'll have to wait and see how it develops from here on. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you.